Okay.
The world.
The world. Did you take yours? The flesh, the world, and then the demonic spirits, okay? And of course, you know, I know some of those can be interchangeable, and you know, the flesh and the world kind of, the world feeds the flesh, and the flesh can, I guess, feed the world, and of course, the demonic spirits feed our flesh, and they get their stuff from the world. So I know those can be interchangeable. Tonight we're going to get more specific, okay? More specific on, those are basically the three categories, or the three types of weapons, of where they come from. So think of those as different bases where Satan obtains his arsenal to attack us with, from the world, from the flesh, and from his own evil spirits. So look at Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 16. Ephesians chapter 6, verse 16, above all, taking the shield of faith, wherewith ye shall be able to quench all the fiery darts of the wicked. So tonight, we're going to talk about the fiery darts of the wicked one. The fiery darts of the wicked one. And then shortly, in a couple weeks, we got the enemy's snares coming up, and then we have Satan's temptations coming up as other specific weapons that Satan uses. And so, but tonight, the fiery darts of the wicked. Let me pray and ask God for help. Lord, I need your help now. I have very few of what my notes and I studied, memorized, Lord, so I need your help to recall some of the information, Lord. I just pray that you help me to teach the Word of God and be helpful to someone here tonight as we think of Satan's fire darts. Lord, bless us as we look at your Word, and just give us what we need tonight. You know the situation and the lives of everyone here tonight. I pray that you cause me to say something that needs to be said, that needs to be an encouragement to someone, as we should instruct and teach on spiritual warfare once again. We ask for your Spirit now as his help, for his help as we teach. In Christ's name, amen. So we're writing here, the Apostle Paul is writing about spiritual warfare. Now, one of the things you have to remember is that during this time, the Roman government was very much a military power. And of course, they had control over the Jews. So as Paul is writing, and he's given this description of the armor that a Christian is to wear, he's basically using the armor that the Romans would wear as an illustration of what we should wear spiritually. Okay, so with a little foundation with that, in the natural realm, the Romans would have fiery darts, which would basically be just bow and arrow, a bow with an arrow on it, of course a sharp arrow on the end of it, but also right below that it would be some kind of material below the stone or the metal, whatever the spear was made of. Below that there would be a material that would be flammable, something that could burn. Obviously a stone or a metal would not burn, but right below that triangular spear would be a part that could be lit on fire. So that's what it's talking about here. It has a double-edged sword, if you will, or a double weapon it is, because first of all, the spear, as I shot it, it would hit someone, and of course the initial dagger of having a spear into your heart or into your back or into your midsection was painful and would cause a lot of bleeding. But that wasn't the main thing. After it did that, that part that was on fire, that flaming part, would catch the clothing of the person on fire, or if it hit a building and maybe it would catch a house on fire. But so these fiery darts were much more intense than just a regular bow and arrow, okay? You know, they were much fiercer and sharper and could do a lot more damage. And so these fiery darts that these Roman soldiers used in the natural realm were very destructive. And now Paul is going spiritually, and he's going to give that same illustration, that same weapon as an illustration to what happens with us, how Satan desires to shoot his fiery darts on us. In other words, Satan has a desire to first initially wound you and penetrate you with a sharp, deep pain. But then His goal is for that deep pain to stay there and to burn. And to continually burn. It's not just the initial hurt or initial blast that is usually most often the worst thing. It is the aftermath of that and the fiery dart. And so you're going to see where we'll get some illustrations of what that all entails. So it's a little bit of background about what the fiery darts are. And like I said, I have a lot of notes and a lot more introduction on that, but I'm trying my best just to give it off the top of my head. So these fiery darts that Satan whirls at us is initial penetration to hurt and to cause pain and affliction on you. But then his desire is for that pain to continue and to continue to burn within your heart. So with that, when we think of fiery darts, I want you to think of Satan attacking your spirit, your heart, and your mind. It's the fiery darts of Satan is a bombardment of attacks on your mind. That is your mind being your emotions, your attitude, and your will. Okay, so Satan has a desire to attack your mind, your emotions, your attitude, and your will. And he'll use different emotions and different circumstances to bring harm to you. So we're just going to look at a few here tonight. If I try to write down as much as I can remember here. Let me get my 3x5 card. The first one I want to look at tonight is Genesis chapter 4. Okay, Genesis chapter 4. And we're going to be looking at a few different scriptures here. But if you go to Genesis chapter 4, and we have the story of Cain and Abel. In Genesis chapter 4, let's look at verse 3. It says, "In the process of time it came to pass that Cain brought of the fruit of the ground an offering unto the Lord. And Abel he also brought of the firstlings of his flock and of the fat thereof. And the Lord had respect unto Abel and to his offering. But unto Cain and to his offering he had not respect. And Cain was very wroth, and his countenance fell. And the Lord said unto Cain, Why art thou wroth? Why is thy countenance fallen? And then you know the story. In verse 8 it talks about how Cain rose up and slew his brother, and killed his own brother. So the first initial thing we see here as we want to illustrate this, how this works in our own lives, the fiery darts of Satan. Satan is a mastermind of being able to use your own emotions and your own feelings against you. And here in our story with Cain and Abel, we see what started this whole process of murder here. In verse 4 it talks about how the Lord had respect unto Abel and to his offering, and not unto Cain's. So immediately here, the initial thing we see with Cain is a disappointment. A disappointment. When you are disappointed, when somebody disappoints you, that is like a door flying open and Satan said, okay, here's my opportunity. They have been disappointed. There's the initial hurt. There's the initial penetration. And now I'm not going to let it go there. I'm going to make sure this thing continues to burn. And he's a mastermind of using your own emotions, your own flesh against you. And so it started off with initial disappointment. Cain was disappointed that God respected Abel's offering and not his. And that disappointment, and like it often and most always does, leads to anger. Cain was wroth in verse 5. When we are disappointed, when we have somebody disappoint us, when we have something go wrong in our lives, when we feel just let down, oftentimes that disappointment will lead to an angry spirit. And the anger, the wrath of man worketh not the righteousness of God. The anger of man, the Bible does say, be angry and sin not. So you can be angry, Jesus was, and without sinning. So you can be angry and not sin. I'm not saying automatically when you're angry, you're sinning. But Satan uses disappointment to bring anger. That anger is a wrath. It is an emotion that controls you. It is a flying off the handle and just being under the control of an ungodly spirit. Listen, when Jesus was mad, it was because he was mad on purpose. Jesus didn't just fly off the handle. Jesus had a purpose going into the temple. Listen, they're not going to do this. He had a righteous indignation. This is the house of God. This is the place that shall be called the house of prayer. And it's become a den of thieves. They're selling and making money in the temple. So he went in there with an anger, flipped over the tables, and whipped those people out of there. But it was a planned out, righteous anger that God allowed. It was not fly off, I'm going to hurt you, I'm going to kill you kind of anger. So Genesis chapter 4, verse 3, we see Cain, disappointment, which led to anger. And anger is a huge issue, folks. You need to make sure that you take care of that anger. But a lot of people try to focus on the anger, and they never deal with the disappointment. That's why it's so important for you to be healed of all your hurts. That's why it's so important to bring all your disappointments to the foot of the cross. Saying, God, it's not right. It's not fair. That person let me down. That person hurt me. And I'm disappointed at. Or maybe it's just disappointed with the way your life has turned out. People have had it better, God. And I just feel disappointed that things are going on in my life the way they have. And so that disappointment is a huge door for Satan to go after in your life. So make sure you deal with those disappointments. And don't let them become anger. That's what Satan wants. And then anger, of course, in this story here, led to the murder of his own brother. And so the fire dart of disappointment, which leads to anger. And you cannot be a good Christian if you're always angry. You just can't. The Bible, the book of Proverbs is full of it. We can't go into all the details of it. But that is, the anger of man is just something that Satan wants to use in your life. So there's a fire dart of disappointment. Let's go on to let's go to Jeremiah chapter 15 now, okay? Jeremiah 15. And we're going to give you 5 tonight. I had more than that, but these are the only ones that I could remember off the top of my head. Jeremiah chapter, at least the references. Jeremiah chapter 15. And let's see if I can find the verses here. Jeremiah 15. Okay, verse 17. Jeremiah 15 and verse 17. Look there with me. It says there, I sat not in the assembly of the mockers, nor rejoiced. I sat alone because of thy hand, for thou hast filled me with indignation. Why is my pain perpetual, and my wound incurable, which refuseth to be healed? Wilt thou be altogether unto me as a liar, and as waters that fail? And we just gave you 2 verses, but throughout the whole book of Jeremiah, you'll see this common thing with Jeremiah. Jeremiah was rejected. He preached. And man, he preached and he gave good illustrations, but it all went unheeded. The nation of Israel did not care what he was preaching about. They did not repent of their sin. They did not receive his preaching. And humanly speaking, modern day, we would look at Jeremiah as a failure. I mean, he preached all those years, but he never built a big church. He never had a big following. He was disliked, and people hated him, and he never really led any whole flock of people to faith in God. And so modern day, we would think of Jeremiah as a failure. But in many instances, as we just look at the factual texture of this book, in many instances, he did fail. Not that he failed in God's eyes, but he felt as a failure. He felt rejected. People hated him. People did not want to hear what he had to say. And because of his rejection, notice what he said in verse 17. I sat not in the assembly of the mockers. People were mocking him. People were making fun of him. Oh, here comes that old lunatic Jeremiah. He's always preaching doom and gloom. And he's always preaching the judgment of God. And here comes that old man, that old fogey. And the bearer of bad news, and they mocked Jeremiah. They laughed at him. They laughed at his illustrations that he would use as he preached. And so they had no joy for Jeremiah. They had no care for him. And because of that, look at the very next phrase. He said, I sat alone because of thy hand. We see in Jeremiah the fiery dart of rejection. The fiery dart of rejected. People rejected him. They did not receive him and what he had to say. They did not accept him. And what did that lead to? Loneliness. He says, I sat alone. I sat alone. Many and many people have been rejected by someone. And the moment they're rejected, Satan's antennas go up and say, okay, this is a great opportunity for me to get that person. This is a great opportunity for me to take that initial hurt and initial pain and make sure it continues to burn their whole life. What their mom did to them, what their dad, what their uncle, what their relatives, what their friend, what their spiritual leader did to them, whatever the case may be, Satan wants that to continue to burn in the heart of God's people. He wants that loneliness to continue. And boy, was Jeremiah a lonely man, humanly speaking, but of course God was with him. And so we see the fiery dart of rejection. When someone doesn't receive you, when someone doesn't accept you with genuine love and acceptance and approval, many people are forced to live a life of, I'm all alone. I have nobody on my side. I have no one caring for me. I have nobody that supports me. I forget who it was. It might have been Dr. Jack Howes that said it, but I remember hearing this statement over and over and over again. Young people would not go wrong if they knew they had at least one person that genuinely believed in them. And I guess I can go beyond young people, but I heard that statement over and over and over and over again. And so many young people just give up on God, give up on Christianity, give up on living for Christ, give up on God because they don't feel like no one really believes in them, no one really cares about them, no one really genuinely accepts them for who they are and believes that they can make it as a Christian and serve God with their lives. And so make sure we are not rejecting people, that we're just allowing Satan to use ourselves as his fiery darts. But the fiery dart of disappointment leads to anger. The fiery dart of rejection leads to loneliness. Now let's go to the fiery dart of Numbers chapter 14. We won't go back. Numbers chapter 14. And this one scares me, I'll be honest with you. Numbers chapter 14. Numbers chapter 14. And let's look at verse 1. Numbers 14 and verse 1. And all the congregation lifted up their voice and cried, and the people wept that night. And all the children of Israel murmured against Moses and against Aaron. And the whole congregation said unto them, Would God that we had died in the land of Egypt, or would God we had died in this wilderness? And whereof hath the Lord brought us into this land, to fall by the sword, that our wives and our children should be a prey? Were it not better for us to return into Egypt? And they said one to another, Let us make a captain, and let us return into Egypt. Prior to this, you had 12 spies sent out, two spies returned, and Joshua and Caleb, and said gave a good report that we can do it, we can take the land. The other 10 discouraged everybody, says, no, we can't do it. They're like grasshoppers in our sight. The Anakites they're huge, they're giants, and we're just like grasshoppers in their sight. And so they discouraged the whole congregation, and that's where chapter 14 picks up. And the whole congregation is weeping and crying. In other words, they're discouraged. They're discouraged. They had been following Moses. They've been promised that they were going to enter a promised land. a land that's flowing with milk and honey. They have their hopes up. They're looking forward to it. And now they're sitting there looking at the impossibility of taking that land. And they begin to cry and weep. And then they begin to murmur and say, we should have just stayed in Egypt. We should have just died in Egypt. Would God we had died in Egypt? And they begin to murmur and complain about it. Their discouragement here leads to rebellion. You notice that in verse 4. Yes, this is rebellion. When you lift up your hand against God's anointed leader, and they did, they lifted up their hand against Moses. Moses, we want another captain. We don't want you anymore, Moses. We want someone else to lead us. And their discouragement led to rebellion against the authority figure in their life that God placed there. That was Moses. And that is rebellion. Oftentimes we think of rebellion as something really, really, really bad. And it is. It's really bad. But here it is, the rebellion of Israel as they rebel against Moses and his leadership. And I said that scares me because, boy, I've been discouraged a lot. And I'm not trying to get your pity, but there seemed like, for no reason, just as I go throughout the day, for no reason, I don't even know why it comes upon me, but I just feel discouraged for a moment. And and I know it's Satan trying to work against me and trying to discourage me and get me down. But to think that just discouragement can be so deadly that it can lead to rebellion. We read of some of the people that have been great men of God or great leaders who have fallen away from God and who have rebelled and done their own thing. Guess what? Most of the time it started with discouragement. It started with discouragement. They were discouraged over something. Somebody said they were discouraged over a problem. They were discouraged over this. And that discouragement led to rebellion. Don't take discouragement lightly. And I don't have the answer to it. I haven't conquered it yet. But I know that we are to encourage ourselves in the Lord, the Bible says. I know David did that. And so, but when we are discouraged, realize that as a fiery dart, that's an emotion that Satan wants to use against you to cause you to flee and run from God, run from God's will, run from God's plan in your life. Rebellion is by not doing the will of God. And discouragement, that little thing could cause someone to step out of the will of God and not to continue to follow God's plan and will for their lives. So the fiery dart of discouragement here. Let's go to 2 Corinthians chapter 2. 2 Corinthians chapter 2. 2 Corinthians chapter 2, we see another fiery dart that many people struggle with. And 2 Corinthians chapter 2 and verse 10. 2 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 10. To whom ye forgive anything, I forgive also. For if I forgive anything, to whom I forgive it, for your sakes forgive I it in the person of Christ, lest Satan should get an advantage of us, for we are not ignorant of his devices. The fiery dart of unforgiveness. Examine your heart tonight. You make sure that there's nobody in your life that you haven't forgiven. Now I know that's easy to say, and there are some things that we could name and give as an illustration that we could say, well, that's unforgivable. It's just no. There's no way you can forgive a person. But unforgiveness only hurts the person that's not willing to forgive. It doesn't hurt the offender. The person that does you wrong, you can go without forgiving them, but it's not going to hurt them. It's going to destroy and damage us. Forgiveness is not saying what someone did to me is okay, because it's not. But forgiveness is cutting the rope and is taking away the bondage from you being connected to that person and what they did to you. That's what forgiveness is. Forgiveness is, letting loose of the pain and anguish, the spirit within you, and the grudge that is being held against a person. Unforgiveness. Listen, people are hurt all the time. People are hurt all the time. And if we don't forgive, we're going to just be taken advantage of, as the Bible says here, by Satan. Someone did you wrong. There's nothing you can do to change it. Whether that person pays is between them and God. But don't make yourself pay by holding that grudge or that unforgiveness, because you're only going to harm yourself. Trust me with that. It's so important that you forgive. It's so important that you say, hey, if Christ could say, Father, forgive them for what they do, the people that put him to death, I guess I can take this person of Christ that lives within me and allow him to rule and reign in my life, and he will forgive other people through me. You know, humanly speaking, there are some things that you'll never be able to forgive anybody. Humanly speaking, you just, let's take in someone killing one of your child. I mean, if somebody killed my child, how could I really forgive that person? Humanly speaking, in the flesh, I can't. But the Christ that lives within me could. Would it be difficult? Yes, but it's not impossible. Christ within me could forgive that person. And so we think of different situations like that. And it's so important. Why? Because unforgiveness leads to bitterness. Unforgiveness leads to bitterness. And bitterness defiles not just yourself, but anybody you come into contact with. It's so important. Not only that, but we can go into all the health issues that come from the lack of unforgiveness and bitterness, and how it affects your heart and your blood pressure and all that. But so many things with unforgiveness. The fiery dart of unforgiveness. Lastly, we'll look at one more here. Matthew 27. And we're talking about different emotions that Satan wants to continually to use in your life. That he wants that burning sensation to continue. He wants that emotion to continually burn within you, because when it continues to burn, eventually it'll engulf you and just consume you, destroy you. And so we need to make sure that we see these emotions for what they are, and ask God's grace and mercy, and go to God in prayer to conquer these struggles that we have with these emotions. Matthew 27, and let's see, verse 3. Matthew 27, verse 3. Then Judas, which had betrayed him, when he saw that he was condemned, repented himself, brought again the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and elders, saying, I have sinned in that I have betrayed the innocent blood. And they said, What is that to us? See thou to that. And he cast down the pieces of silver in the temple, and departed, and went and hanged himself. This next fiery dart is the fiery dart of guilt. Fiery dart of guilt. Judas was full of guilt, full of shame of what he did to an innocent man. Not just an innocent man, a man that he lived with for 3.5 years. The man that he would follow and spend time with. And Judas' emotion of guilt would ruin him. And often that guilt does ruin a lot of people. That guilt, that shame leads to despair. It leads to giving up. Despair. Saying, I've had enough. I'm just not doing this anymore. I'm quitting. I'm giving up on God. I'm quitting on my Bible reading. I'm quitting praying. God doesn't hear me anyway. I'm quitting living for God. I messed up. I'm guilty that I did that. I'm guilty that I fell into sin. I'm ashamed of this. I'm ashamed of this in my life. I'm ashamed I grew up in this situation. And whatever it may be, whatever shame that is, or it could be because present sin that we're living in, where we feel shameful and just a despair, and we just want to give up. Judas gave up the ultimate way by taking his life. Does that mean a Christian's not saved if they commit suicide? I don't believe that for a second. Samson, I think, technically committed suicide. He brought the pillars down on himself in order to kill other people, but that would fit in my example of definition of suicide. We know he's mentioned in the Bible. Saul is mentioned, and we know that he killed himself. So I don't think that's the unforgivable sin. Some people try to say that, but the unforgivable sin is blasphemy against the Holy Spirit. The Bible, I believe, is clear on that. But good Christians can get so guilty, so shameful, so much depressed and despair to where they think, man, the only way out is taking our life and go home to be with God. Of course, that is not our decision to make. Our lives are in God's hand. He decides when we go home to glory. But Judas was so shameful, so guilty, that he decided to end his life because of that guilt and shame. Many people won't go that far, but they will quit on God. They will give up. They will stop serving, living for God. They will despair in their Christian life because of that shame or guilt. So these are 5 different fire darts that I gave you tonight, and there are more, and I wish I could remember them all. I wish I had the notes, but maybe we'll come back next week and just touch on some things that I missed tonight. Okay, well, I think we'll stop there.